Hello, and welcome to Just One Thing for Parents. I'm Bettina Honan. Today, we're taking a journey back through some of our earliest and most impactful conversations, focusing on how to support children who are facing challenges. So, what I've done is carefully selected clips from 4 outstanding episodes, each featuring an expert in their field to bring you a compilation of incredible insights and practical tips. So, here's what you can look forward to. First, we hear from Dawn Huebner, who talks about strategies for supporting children with anxiety. Next, David Trickey is going to give us some guidance on managing situations where your child has experienced trauma. Then Anita Clear, who is going to provide some expert advice on what to say when your child comes to you with a difficulty. And finally, Cynthia Russo will help us explore ways to activate our children's problem-solving skills. So I'm releasing this episode during the summer holidays, hoping it's going to be really valuable for parents whose children might be struggling during this time. Parents with their kids a lot over the holidays. And so these could be something you can dip into and have some ideas about how to manage if your child is anxious, if they're asking you a lot of problems, you want to help them to begin to problem solve themselves, or potentially if there's been some traumatic event. Whether you're a long-term listener revisiting these gems or a new audience member who's discovering them for the first time, I'm really confident that you will find these must-hear moments both insightful and practical. So please keep listening and explore these essential tips for supporting children through their challenges. First, we'll hear from Dawn Huebner, who recorded episode 1 of the podcast, and she talks about how to support young people who are struggling with anxiety.
We operate under this really misplaced or mistaken idea that kids need to be kept comfortable and that the goal is to avoid anxiety. And that's really not the goal. The goal is to learn to manage anxiety differently because anxiety is going to happen and we want to learn to respond to it differently. So yes, you do intentionally try to trigger some anxiety in a titrated way, a little bit at a time to help kids learn how to manage it differently. And also importantly, what we're trying to teach kids through exposure is that being afraid is different from being in danger, and that their fear is essentially a false alarm. And the only way they can really learn that at kind of a deep brain level is by being repeatedly exposed to the thing that makes them nervous and seeing that actually nothing bad happens. They're nervous, but there's nothing catastrophic or dangerous or painful or terrible that happens. And that's how kids learn that these are quote unquote false alarms and that they're afraid, but they're not in danger. And that leads to just a major shift in terms of how kids understand and respond to their own anxiety.
I wonder if you could just give a real life example for people.
Sure. So let's use an example about a phobia, something like a fear of bees, right? So one way of handling this, which is not the way that I recommend, would be to wait until your child is outside and encounters a bee and feels afraid and try to talk them out of their fear, try to reassure them or use logic with them or comfort them in some way, say the bee's not going to sting you or whatever. That is not likely to be very effective in the long run, right? So what I'm recommending is to have your child purposely practice either being outside, because often kids who are afraid of bees won't even go outside because they're afraid they're going to encounter a bee. Or if your child is already comfortably going outside, you would look for places where there are bees that are likely to exist.
Wow,
and
that's
you
radical.
have your child practice
Yeah.
watching the bees, getting closer and closer to the bees. And you can make it fun. You want to be creative in some way. So you can have a child go on a bee photo safari where you're challenging them to take pictures of bees, or you can do some kind of outdoor scavenger hunt and include places where you know there are likely to be bees. So, trash cans or things of that sort. You can have kids do experiments where they're leaving juice in little open containers outside and watching to see if bees come. So, you can make it interesting and fun for kids, but you're not fostering avoidance. You're doing the opposite of that. You're kind of intentionally courting the thing that your child normally avoids, and you're having them practice be in that situation.
Yeah. And presumably some kids will say, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to, but we have to be strong, right? And push through.
We do. And, we can teach even very young kids about how our brains and our bodies are set up to help us get used to things. We can get used to things that are uncomfortable for us or that are scary for us. And the way to do that is by intentionally doing those things. And so, there's no trickery. We don't try to kind of fool our kids into doing this. I think we can be really explicit about we're going to practice this, because getting used to being outside or being around bees is a way that you'll get to enjoy being outside more, or being with your friends, or doing the things our families want to do, right? And it's okay to go in really small steps, right? So you wouldn't have a bee phobic child initially be within a couple inches of a bee, but you might have them look at bees from afar with binoculars, or, use the camera on your phone and have them zoom in standing far away. And then gradually over time, you're having them get closer and closer and closer. So exposure is happens best when it's frequent and when it's progressive, meaning you're kind of taking small steps, but you're adding to those steps and making them a little bit more challenging and a little bit more challenging over time.
Next up is David Trickey, who recorded episode 3. He talks about how to support a young person when they've experienced a traumatic event.
A potentially traumatic event, the child may well feel incredibly unsafe, uncertain, very distressed. And if a parent just kind of steamrollers in and says, it's okay, you're safe now, that might be true, and there might be a place for that. But the child's view of themselves as not being safe is based on their traumatic experience. And if a parent just says, oh, you're safe, the child might feel, well, you don't get it, you don't understand. And they may then keep the fact they don't feel safe to themselves. And the parent has then lost that opportunity to lead them to that idea that they are now safe. So I think it's really important that rather than just forcing on our own interpretation of events onto children, that we guide them and we help them to reach their own interpretation, their own meaning making. And one of the important aspects of that is to listen carefully to why they don't feel unsafe, why they don't feel that the world is now safe enough and that other people can be trusted. So I think it's really important to listen carefully before we respond and speak with them.
And I want to pick up on that, the phrase you used there, that meaning making. Can you say a little more about that?
Sure. So probably the most important thing about traumatic events is interpretation. It's not how big or bad the event was, although of course that's important. It's what does the child and young person make of it? So I've worked with many children and young people who have experienced awful events, but actually they kind of skip through it. They find a way of making sense of it as a one-off event, wrong place, wrong time, really bad luck, but it's really rare, and they kind of move on with life. Others may take an event that might not be as severe, but think, oh my goodness, that could have been so much worse. My whole world is now unsafe. I feel very vulnerable. I can't trust anyone. So that event, sometimes it might be a one-off event, sometimes it'll be a number of events, has now changed the way they see themselves, the world, and other people. And that then changes the way that they think and the way that they feel and what they do and the way that they behave. So I often think of it as a lens. You know, we have a lens that colors the way we see the world. We might think the world as being predictable, broadly speaking, making sense, other people being nice enough, ourselves as being lovable enough. And then an event or a series of events comes along and it changes that lens. It changes the color. So we start to see everything subsequently to be different. The one-off event of the trauma, if you like, takes precedence over all other experience, and it colors the way we see things. We now see the world as unsafe, ourselves as vulnerable or unlovable, other people as untrustworthy. And in order to repair that lens, in order to recolor it back to a view that's useful, it's really important that people engage in conversations and that parents listen to the way that their child now sees the event and then helps them to think that through and to, if you like, recalibrate or rebalance their belief system, to change the way that they think about that event and the effect that event has on their view.
Mm. And I really see how the 2 ears and 1 mouth comes in there, because a child doesn't realize that's only their interpretation. So they've got to say it out loud first. And then there's an opportunity to help them to adjust it maybe and change it.
Yeah. And another problem with trauma often is avoidance. So the child might have this intrusive thought, the world is unsafe. That's awful. So they push it away. And then it comes back in and they push it away. But if a parent can help them to think the world is unsafe because this happened and that happened, and they can start to complete that thought process, because it's quite distressing to think that the world is unsafe. So people try to push it away. But with a parent's help, the child can bring it into mind and think it through and begin to integrate those events into a view of the world as safe enough. So that's why the 2 ears are important, because we need to really understand where's the child starting from, what's their view of the world, themselves and others, and then we can start to help them to recalibrate it.
What makes it hard for parents, would you say, to do that?
Well, I think there's something about trauma that freezes some parents. So if a child comes home from school and they've fallen over in the playground and they've hurt their knee and maybe their trousers are ripped at the knee, most parents are pretty good at saying, oh, what's happened there? Let's clear that up. What happened? Oh, he pushed you over. He's done that before. What are we going to do about that? They're very good at caring for children after stressful events. But when it's trauma, something changes. They kind of go, oh, I don't know how to do this. This is beyond my skill set. I need to get a specialist in. And they sort of lose their basic parenting skills. Not they lose them, but they think that that's not enough.
Yes.
And actually, a lot of my job is about saying, do you know what? It is enough.
I agree.
They don't need to come and see me as a therapist. What they need is the person they already know, love, and trust to actually help them to recover and to think it through. So I think there's something really important for parents to understand, that they have a crucial role in creating that environment for recovery. That doesn't mean it's their fault if the child doesn't recover completely, but they have a really important role.
Next is Anita Clare from episode 4, who talks about how to support young people when they come to you with their struggles.
One piece of advice, if a parent is struggling, is to listen, don't fix. So as adults, we are often very quick to jump in and try and fix children's problems for them or give advice or suggestions, but often we help our children most just by listening, just by giving them a safe sounding board to work through their own problem, reach their own understanding and come up with their own ideas about what they could do. So children don't always need our advice, just our ears.
But I think what you're saying is it's really important to stop and give them time. So it's giving them time to work it out themselves and also validating their experience and their emotions. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's the difference between a child saying to us, I have a problem, and us giving our wisdom, our solutions, and saying, why don't you do this? Versus a child saying, I have a problem, and us responding, wow, I can see that. I can see you have a problem. That's tough. Tell me more about it. And then maybe asking them, well, what ideas have you got for fixing that? What have you tried so far? And handing it to them rather than us taking responsibility for solving. So that might be a prompt or a question or validating how they're feeling rather than offering the solution. So it gives them that space to express and to explore in that safe space.
And even if they say to you, tell me, what shall I do? What shall I do? What would you do in that situation?
Well, I think we can offer advice to our children if we signal clearly that it is. And we say, well, I'm not you. I'm not in that situation. These are the things that I might think about. So rather than offering up a single solution, saying these are the things I would consider perhaps. So we can put some ideas into the mix without giving them an actual solution.
Yeah. And you've given us some lovely phrases there for things to say and ways to say it. So can I give you a little example of something and we could work it through as a problem? So let's say a parent of a teenager had a child who comes home absolutely distraught as they haven't been invited to a party. So they're crying inconsolably. What would you suggest a way in which a parent can do this listening in that situation, which is really distressing, right? To see your teenager in that situation.
I think the first thing is just stay calm and pause, notice what's going on, be available. The most important thing, I think, is not to try and change their mind, not to try and cheer them up, to tell them it's all okay, but to acknowledge, okay, wow, it looks like you're really upset about that. That's obviously hurtful. And perhaps asking, what do you think might be going on here? And rather than, shall we say, engaging with their solutions, if they say, oh, well, so-and-so's just, doing this or being this type of person, rather than denying that and saying, oh, I'm sure they didn't mean to be mean, or trying to interpret the situation for them, saying, yeah, I guess that's one possibility. What else might be going on? So widening the discussion to think about it from different angles and accepting whatever comes to them, rather than us trying to shape their thinking at that moment. So we allow them a little bit of space. And often, teenagers, they find their way through things because they are really smart. They do understand their friendships, and they find a way to understand what's going on if we give them that space to talk about it and we listen without judging or jumping in.
And finally, Cynthia Russo from episode 2, who talks about how to activate young people's problem-solving skills.
The majority of parents come to me with some form of, how can I stop my child from doing X? So it might be, how can I stop my child from complaining? Or how can I stop my child from dating the person she's dating? Or how can I stop my child from tantruming? They think I have this secret sauce, and they come to me for me to tell them what they should do so they can get the outcome they want. Let's take an example. A child comes home, they've had a terrible day at school, the teacher shouted at them. They no longer want to go to school. So I would say, oh, that sounds really hard. I listen. I accept what they're saying. I don't say, I don't think they shouted at you. Oh, it probably wasn't that bad. Oh, honey, that happens when I was a girl. I got shouted at. I say, oh, I really listen. And then I empathize. That sounds really hard. What ideas do you have? I don't want to go to school anymore. So I recommend taking a list and writing down whatever your child says, even if it's outlandish. Okay. This is not your job to judge. You're just writing it down. And they feel when you do this, oh, she's taking it really seriously.
So they come up with the solutions. You say to them, what do you think the solution is?
Yes, what do you think? So you're saying to me, you don't think you can go to school tomorrow. Okay, let's write that down. Not attend school tomorrow. And then the child might say, actually, not attend school ever. So I write that down. Okay, not attend school ever.
You'd even write that one down?
I'd write that. Whatever they say, you write down. You're not judging at this point. And then I say, okay, what else? Well, I might go to school, but I'm not ever opening my mouth. Okay, go to school, don't speak. I might go to school and I'm going to yell at the teacher. Okay, yell at the teacher. So whatever they say, you write down. And then you say, okay, let's have a look. What do you think is realistic here? Which of these options looks best? I don't think never going to school again is an option. I might say, or they might say, I can't really not go to school. I have that football match tomorrow and I really want to play. Or, Sally has a sleepover and I really want to go to that. So we sort of let them think about, okay, what can I do?
There's something that's a bit cathartic for them, maybe, in that they can kind of say these really extreme things and you listen and you don't tell them off for having those thoughts, but you're taking them seriously, but then you're giving them a bit of distance to judge them.
Exactly. It's sort of a listen, accept, empathize, validate, and then they're ready to problem solve. But I think what it does is it builds this capacity for self-reflection.